There's a moment in Tsukimichi that still divides fans to this day. For some, it is the point where the story finally reaches its most ambitious stage. For others, it is the exact arc that completely changes the pacing of the series. And the most interesting part is that this controversy does not come from a single battle, but from a much larger transformation than it first appears. The question is simple. Why is this considered Tsukimichi's most controversial arc? Until now, the story has maintained a balance between humor, action, and Makoto's personal growth. He was building his community, facing new enemies, and at the same time trying to live a relatively peaceful life. Or at least as peaceful as someone absurdly overpowered can manage. But that starts to change. The first clue is that the scale of the story expands dramatically. The focus shifts away from local conflicts and begins to involve entire kingdoms, political alliances, and decisions capable of altering the balance of the world. What happened? Makoto stops influencing only those around him and begins directly affecting the fate of entire nations. Why is this important? Because every decision now creates much greater consequences, and a single mistake could trigger large-scale conflicts. As a result, what once felt like a controlled adventure turns into a struggle with far higher stakes. And this is only the first major change. Another reason this arc is so controversial is the pacing of the story. Up to this point, many events were resolved relatively quickly, but now the narrative spends much more time on politics, diplomacy, and the development of characters and factions. What happened? The series begins exploring in detail how the world reacts to Makoto's growing influence. Why is this important? Because it adds significant depth to the story, but it also changes the experience for viewers who were expecting constant battles. As a result, some fans consider this the best phase of the series, while others feel the pacing becomes slower. And that is exactly where the controversy begins. But this is still not the most divisive aspect. There is another element that splits the fanbase even more: Makoto's own attitude. From the beginning, he tried to avoid becoming directly involved in many conflicts. But as his influence grows, he becomes more decisive, more strategic, and far more willing to impose his own will. What happened? Makoto starts making decisions that deeply affect other people and the balance of the world. Why is this important? Because he stops being merely a powerful observer and begins acting as someone capable of redefining the future of everyone around him. As a result, his development excites many fans, but also surprises those who were used to a more passive version of the character. And that completely changes the dynamic of the story. Another reason this arc is discussed so intensely is the growth of the supporting characters. Figures who once seemed like secondary characters begin playing essential roles. At the same time, long-standing tensions finally start producing real consequences. What happened? The narrative becomes more complex and deeply interconnected. Why is this important? Because every character now has a meaningful impact on the development of the story. As a result, the world of Tsukimichi becomes far more alive and unpredictable. And here is the real reason behind the controversy. This arc changes the very identity of the series. Until this point, Tsukimichi was primarily seen as the journey of an overwhelmingly powerful protagonist trying to find his place in a hostile world. From this point forward, it becomes the story of someone capable of reshaping the political, social, and military structure of the entire world. And that naturally attracts new allies, new enemies, new conflicts, and far more complex challenges. Basically, Makoto just wanted to live peacefully, teach a few classes, and take care of his community. Now he's getting closer and closer to influencing the fate of entire kingdoms. Not bad for someone who was rejected by the goddess herself. In the end, this arc is considered controversial because it represents the greatest structural change in Tsukimichi. For some, it is the moment when the story becomes far richer and more ambitious. For others, it is the point where the series unexpectedly changes its pacing and focus. But one thing is certain. After this arc, Tsukimichi will never be the same again. Now tell me, do you believe this is truly the most controversial arc in the series? Or do you think this transformation makes Tsukimichi even better? Subscribe to the channel, because there are still many hidden details in Tsukimichi that completely change everything you thought you knew about the story.